Thank you very much, Gillian. And I want to start off just by saying a few thanks also to the Fawcett team, who've worked really hard to put today on for us, and to the Neil Stewart's Associates team as well, who've been fantastic partners for this conference, and also to all our other partners who are with us today and sponsoring events and so on, and Gillian and the panel. So I'm just going to do a bit of a scene setter for us and talk about the pay gap in sort of big picture terms first, and then go in to share some insights with you that we've got from various surveys and things we've done over the last year. Because I think it's important that we think about why it's good for the UK economy and good for UK businesses to close the gender pay gap. We can't presume that everyone cares about equality, much as I hope that all of you sitting in this room do. But I don't think we can make that assumption. We still do have to appeal to the sort of business case and the bottom line, really. And I think what I'll be able to share with you is sort of insights into some of the barriers, or what we perceive as maybe some of the barriers to progress, so why we're not seeing faster progress in the workplace. And then also a little bit about what women are looking for from employers, so why this is going to matter in terms of recruitment and retention of employees as well. So as Gillian set out, she gave us sort of the current gender pay gap figures. They were the sort of mean average figures, so that includes the highest and the lowest earners. You also often get the median average quoted. So in the median average, it's about 9.4% for full-time work and 19% for all women. Interestingly, the thing about the pay gap is it starts off before women have children. So there is a gender pay gap there before women have children, but it grows significantly. It really significantly widens once women become mothers. And a recent study from the Institute for Fiscal Studies showed that the pay gap before they have children was 12%, but then by the time 12 years after that first child was born, it had grown to 33%. So you can see that actually having children, the impact of having children, is one of the big drivers, but one of the things we always are keen to point out is it's not the only driver. And we must remember there are other causes of the pay gap too. And what the pay gap tells us is it's an average figure. So it's the difference in hourly pay between women and men. That's what we're quoting. And our legislation gives women the right to equal pay for equal work or work of equal value. So the individual can point to a comparator in their workplace and say, I should be paid the same as them. So that's what our legislation provides for, that's equal pay. But what you're being asked to report on is that average figure. So it's a more complex figure, and it's a more complex picture. And that presents challenges, I think, for all organisations in terms of meeting the requirements of the new regulations, because you're going to be faced with telling the world you've got a gender pay gap, most of you. It's very unusual to find you haven't got one at all. And explaining that figure to people in a world where actually they tend to apply quite simplistic logic to it when you're reporting it, thinking, well, does that mean you're paying women and men unequally or unfairly? So I think it does present some challenges. But the key thing for us, and hopefully for all of you as well, is that it also presents massive opportunities, because the pay gap is effectively a productivity gap. It represents the waste of female talent and skills and education in the workplace. Women working below their potential. And that is fundamentally bad for the economy and bad for employers and for business as well. So once we engage with it on those terms, and we see that actually closing it can improve business performance and can improve our economic performance, then actually we're all motivated to do something about it. So just thinking a little bit about those different causes. Discrimination does still happen. I don't believe anyone who says that it doesn't happen, and just because we don't see it necessarily doesn't mean it's not there. So we would say that's still a feature potentially in our workplaces. And during this process of looking at where women and men are in your organisation, looking at your pay systems and how women and men are paid, may uncover unequal pay in that process. And that's still something that needs to be addressed and sorted out. But as I said, the unequal impact of caring roles is a major driver. So flexible working, leave entitlements, all of those issues are really fundamental to how we address that. Another cause is occupational segregation. Women and men in different parts of the economy, in different sectors. So women still tend to go into lower paid sectors than men. If we got more women into those higher earning sectors, we would start to close that pay gap. Similarly, if we got more men into some of the lower paid sectors, it would have an impact there too. And then the final cause is vertical segregation. So where you've got women stuck at the bottom and men congregating at the top. And that, again, is going to be a common feature of many workplaces. So that lack of progression of women to the top and the impact that has on the presentation of your pay gap and the profile of your organisation. So gender pay gap reporting, we think, is a good thing. We're very much behind it. We think it's a real opportunity to have a conversation about pay, about where women and men are, and to do that with the focal point of these new regulations coming into force. Now, we still don't know exactly when those regulations are going to be published. We understand it's the autumn. It's October. It is the autumn. They should be out soon. We're going to hear from the Minister later. But I think the thing I would hope that you all leave today with is a real motivation to focus on the issue and what you're going to do about it, what your action plan is going to be. Because if we all just fixate on the figure, the number, and being, meeting the requirements of the regulations, but not really buying into why we're doing it or what's the action plan going to be to solve it, then I think we'll have the wrong focus. So the number is the trigger, the regulations are the opportunity, but the key thing is how are we going to get the best out of our female talent? How are we going to attract the best women to come and work for us? How are we going to make sure that we're as productive as possible and performing as well as we can be? And that's really where we all need to focus our attention. You've all got on your chairs a little postcard, which is an invitation from us to you to join with us, to join a new network of employers. I'll say a little bit more about that later. I'm also chairing a session later and you can find out a bit more about it there or talk to any of the Fawcett team. But what that invitation is doing is saying to you, be part of something positive, be part of something that's actually about doing more than the minimum on gender pay gap reporting. And actually by doing that, it will also help to present what you're doing in a positive light to the outside world. So I'm now going to move on to the presentation. The productivity arguments, the economy will perform better if. Now this is obviously why, not the only reason why, but one of the main reasons why the government is implementing gender pay gap reporting and progressing action on the pay gap, because they buy the argument that the economy would be stronger, we would perform better if we were to close it. So these figures come from McKinsey. Latest report from them suggests that we'd get 840,000 more women into work by 2025 if we close the gender pay gap, that we would add 250 billion to the economy if we close the gender pay gap. So these are really significant sums of money and indicates the scale of the waste that we're talking about in the economy. So that's sort of government's reason to act. Your reason to act is more about, well, what would it mean for your organisation? What would it mean for your business if you were to close it? So here we've got evidence again, McKinsey, Catalyst, really authoritative sources. We get better financial performance, better quality decision making. This is particularly at senior levels we're talking, where we get women into those senior roles and into board positions. And actually just getting the best person for the job. Wouldn't it be nice if we genuinely could do that? And I think that the risk that we have at the moment is that we presume that if a man gets a job, he therefore is the best person for the job. And if a woman gets a job, then maybe she is or she isn't, but actually we're not applying that same principle of meritocracy. And if we try to level the playing field and say, well, actually, maybe we should take positive action to get those underrepresented individuals, whether it be women, BME groups, disabled people and so on, into our organisations, then we're presuming we're not getting the best person for the job. So there's a bit of a double standard applied. So this is just a poll we did in January. It's 8,000 people we surveyed, and we asked men whether they thought they would be better off, it would be better for them. So do they believe in equality, essentially? So we had 9 in 10 men say they want equality. 39%, over a third of men believe that they would benefit if we had a society where women and men were equal. So considerable buy-in from men, 7 in 10 saying it would be better for the economy. And then we've asked very recently in a poll this weekend whether women and men want their organisation that they're looking for in the labour market to be taking action to close the gender pay gap. So what are they looking for? And actually you can see that women are overwhelmingly wanting their employer to be taking action to close the gender pay gap. So that's what they're looking for when they're going out into the labour market. And you need to think about that when you think about how you're going to appear to your prospective employees when you're reporting that figure further down the line, when that figure has become public. How is that going to be managed to the outside world? Because the risk is that they'll see a number and they won't necessarily see anything else. And then it's whose job is it? Whose responsibility is it to close the gender pay gap? And on this you can see that women, overwhelmingly more than men, say it's the employer's job to close the gender pay gap. Then it's the job of government, but then they also say actually individuals have got a job to do too. So everyone's kind of buying into it, there's a stake in it. We've all got a role to play in doing this, but it is seen as an employer's responsibility. So think a little bit about culture now and what one of the big barriers to change might be, what the dominant organisational culture is. And it's a complex thing, we all know it is, and how you drive a culture change, how a culture sort of manifests itself is a very complex thing. But we did a survey, again, this is back from the January survey, where we were talking about men at the top of organisations, and ultimately, would they move over for women to get to the top? Because, you know, there's a bigger economic case, there's a wider argument as to why we have equality, but actually, eventually, when you get to the very top of organisations, it does mean you've got a man at the top who might need to make room for a woman to get on that board or to get it to that senior executive level. And in this, people felt that actually men still wouldn't want to make room. So although we get buy into the principle and the wider case, when it comes to it, it's still a zero-sum game at the top. And then in terms of in a society of women and men are more equal, we had, I'll just sort of find the right notes on here because I can't see the slides effectively. When we asked whether they would be disadvantaged or whether they would benefit, we polled a group of recruitment decision makers as well as a subset within our wider population, and the 1,400 recruitment decision makers. And of that group, 14% said that they would be disadvantaged as a result of equality. 14% said they'd be disadvantaged, whereas in the wider population it was 4%. So what that suggests to me is that in that population we've got a bit of a minority negative attitude. I mean, again, we're going to see it again in a couple of other slides, and that's worrying because they're the people you are relying on to implement policies, to implement these new regulation requirements, to take forward good practice in the organisation. And so if there's a barrier to change there, then we need to know what it is and we need to deal with it. And then on the next slide, it's almost worse in a way. We asked, do you want the women in your life to have equality of opportunity with men? And here we've got 16% of decision makers, recruitment decision makers, saying that they don't. You know, you think, well, really? Don't you want equality for the women in your life? But that's the response that we came back from a poll of 8,000 people, 1,400 decision makers. Now, again, I find that quite worrying, and I think there is a real issue there about a minority effectively acting as barriers to change and not buying into some of the fundamental things that we all think we've bought into already. And then another attitudinal barrier, we think, is the sort of assumptions around women and men when they become parents. So, again, we asked, do you think a woman becomes more or less committed to her job when she has a baby, and similarly whether a man becomes more or less committed to his job when he becomes a father. And here you can see very, very obvious trajectories where women are perceived to be less committed and men are perceived to be more committed. And that, I think, drives our attitudes around opportunities around maternity leave, maternity when you come back from maternity, and how you're treated while you're off, what opportunities you get when you get back, if you want to go part-time, what trajectory you're on when you do go part-time. Do you get the training opportunities, the promotional opportunities, or are you effectively sidelined from those things because you're just not seen as committed to the job anymore? And again, going back to that IFS study that I mentioned at the beginning, they showed that when women became part-time, they were effectively on a trajectory. It's like getting off one escalator and getting on a lower one. And that was going to drive their earning power for the rest of their working lives, effectively. By staying in part-time work, they were trading down and staying in that place. And just as a little aside, I once came back from maternity leave after my third child and was looking for a director-level comms job, searching for those jobs. And I found 100 full-time jobs I felt I had a potential interest in applying for. And then when I went part-time, because I was looking for part-time, there were 2 left for me to apply for. And that's the common pattern. You just don't see quality part-time work. So I think we have to change. That's one of the big structural barriers in the labour market. So this is a final slide, just to think about not only where your organisation is, but where are the people in your organisation? Thinking about the sort of attitudinal barriers I was talking about. You know, on the left-hand side of the slide, effectively, is the poor practice slide. So people who don't buy into it. They might know what the rules and requirements are. They might know what the policy is, but they just don't buy it, and they're not going to play ball with it. Or they may just not know, and they're still going to carry on remaining uninformed. And on the right-hand side, hopefully, which is where all of you are or would want to be, we've got, at the bottom, good practice, but actually probably not too worried about the rules and regulations and the requirements, but actually it may be informal, might be a small business sort of approach. We just do things like that here anyway. We don't worry about all of that. We're just good practice. And that's fine in practice, but still you do really need to know what the requirements are. And then the top half, obviously, we want to make sure, even if people don't necessarily buy into it themselves, they are going to follow the requirements of the regulations and the law when they're applying all the employment practices and so on. So just reflecting on what I said about attitudes, it may be that as an organisation you're very much in the top right corner, but it still could be the case that some of the individuals in your organisation aren't in that place. And that may be one of the challenges you face. And these are just a few references for you at the end. So look forward to the discussion. Thank you.